Welcome to Season 2, Episode 3 of Richmond Entrepreneur, brought to you by Lighthouse Labs. If you haven't heard of Lighthouse Labs, you should, because they're a big-time startup accelerator right here in Richmond, Virginia, that's helped many startups between equity-free money, growth, mentorships, and they actually just completed their 14th cohort, their 14th batch of founders, which I got the pleasure to meet a couple weeks ago and really enjoyed meeting some really good people. On this episode, episode 3, we have Ricky Hewitt, a good friend of mine who founded and is the CEO of a solar solutions engineering company. I had to ask him multiple times what he does. I still don't exactly know, but he does something with solar, and he's a really authentic, genuine, good guy. Ricky dives into the struggles that you face, especially in the first year or two of business, how clarifying your values is one of the most important steps as an entrepreneur, and how you can live authentically as you continue to grow the company. So tune in and enjoy episode 3. Tell us about your story.
My story, personal story, work story. What would you like to hear?
So I want to hear...
Start from the beginning?
I want to hear you start from the beginning, where you grew up, and then I want to hear like college, a little bit after college, a little work history, a little family, a little kind of just dive into everything just a touch, and then we'll kind of dive into more of like the first year, second year in a business.
Okay, yeah. So I grew up in Northeast North Carolina, very rural, very coastal part of the North Carolina. Great family. I had mom and dad who raised me well, I think. 2 sisters, and was really into sports, really into working hard. We come from meager beginnings. You know, money was always, tighter than what we would have hoped. And so my dad was the hardest worker I've ever seen. And he taught me through his example and what hard work looked like. That's and awesome. Also, if I wanted any jingle in my pocket, I needed to put it in there. Yep. So, early on, I was figuring out ways to work. I remember my first job was painting pipeline in Norfolk, Virginia, which took us an hour. My dad worked there. Took me an hour and riding with him in the morning. And after like a summer of doing that, I noticed that my neighbor, who was quite wealthy, they had built this big house on the water and had all this land. And I looked over there and saw that he might need some help around there. So I went over there and pitched my services as a 14-year-old. I said, "Sir, somebody's got to cut around all these pine trees."
And what'd he say?
"Might as well be me." He said, "Be here tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. And I was there. I could ride my four-wheeler over there and said, "Dad, I'm not riding with you an hour into Norfolk, Virginia anymore. I'm cutting trees now."
I got my own thing, Dad.
Cutting grass, yep. So from that point on, I was always finding ways to make a buck.
That's awesome. And so you were involved in sports. You're QB1, right? In high school?
We could talk about that, but I'd prefer not to.
I do, because I always told all my friends after I graduated I was QB1. I wasn't on the football team, but I just say that I was the quarterback for my high school.
Oh, yeah. I've been a poser for a long time, so I identify with that as well.
Yeah. So you're QB1, baseball stud, right? In high school, baseball star. And then you graduated high school and you went to...
North Carolina State University, Wolfpack, yep. I did that because, again, back to the story about having meager beginnings and wanting to honor my parents who raised me and provided everything they could provide for me. I was like, man, I'm good at math. I want to make some money, so I think I'm going to try to become an engineer. So I went off to NC State, and actually in first year, I took a first-year college course, and they did a personality assessment and said, you answer all these questions and we'll tell you what your personality most aligns with. And would you believe it that number 1 was hairstylist and personal trainer. And
wow.
Then the last on the list was civil engineer. And I said, well, you guys obviously don't know how to run these tests. I'm
right.
here
Whoever
to be an
does
engineer.
this is an idiot.
So, Yep, I ignored it and went on, and took me 5 years to get a 4-year degree, probably
Victory
because
lap.
I wasn't meant to be there.
NASCAR background.
Yep, got my civil engineering degree, and here I am.
Yeah, that's awesome. So when did you move to Richmond?
8 years ago, 2014.
Okay. So through high school, you started a business, a couple businesses, and then went to NC State, and then where'd you go after NC State?
So back to the high school years, I found a lawnmower that I was allowed to borrow, used it, started a landscaping business, and had 15 clients until I went off to college. So yeah,
That's awesome.
did the grass mowing at the neighbors, and then took that on to mowing businesses all along the Outer Banks, and residences all on there. Went to NC State. While getting my degree, I became an intern, paid intern at an engineering company while I was going through school.
What drew you to engineering?
Math and money.
Fair enough.
Yeah, that's what it was. I didn't realize that ultimately that wasn't necessarily best path towards money. That was a great motivator, though. Not necessarily to be rich, but to be able to provide for my family and help my parents one day.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of kids that go into college, you Google the starting salary of like your profession, like the starting salary of like, financial analyst, or like what I was doing at least. And I was like, oh, how much can I make out of school?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. When like, they're like I'm like $10 an hour, like $10 an hour. Yeah. That was a big deal then.
Oh yeah. Wow. So anyway, and then you moved after you graduated NC State, you went back home.
Yeah, so that was 2010, and the economy was not too good then, especially for civil engineers. So the job that I had there was no longer because there wasn't any work. So because I grew up by the Outer Banks, the vacation world was still hopping. So I was able to call a few friends. One friend on Mondays and Tuesdays, I sold seafood at their seafood market. On Wednesday, Thursday, Fridays, I worked at a friend's golf course in the country club in the pro shop. And then on Saturdays and Sundays, I cleaned pools with my best friend. So 7 days a week I was working. All of those were sort of jobs that were not impacted as much by the downturn.
Sure. Gotcha. And then after that, I guess you fell in love with engineering a bit.
So yeah, it was always that I knew pridefully, I was like, I got to put this degree to use. And I remember applying for the only job that I could get a response on was a local engineering group that I hadn't heard of. So I applied there, and they made me an offer that was like a third of what I was making cleaning pools, selling seafood. And I came home from that interview and that offer, and told my dad that I felt like I should take it, and that God was sort of impressing on my heart that if I couldn't manage that little bit amount of money, I couldn't manage anything more than that. So it was tough. I took the job, said goodbye to the board shorts and hanging out with my
and the
friends
golf course.
And the golf course.
That's a tough nugget, man. Jeez, the golf course is just a tough nugget.
Yeah, it was good too, because I was playing golf in the afternoons, waiting for the carts to come in.
Oh yeah.
And like I gotta, barefoot on the golf course every day.
The dream.
From like 3. Yeah. So anyway, gave that up to go start my first job, sort of career wise.
So
as an engineer.
How long were you in engineering before you started Hewitt Solutions?
Yeah. So that was 2010. And then for 4 years, I worked for that company down there. And after 4 years, I was due to take my the professional engineering exam. And so I started studying for that, and knew that because I was always a procrastinator, that I would need I'd need to get studied up really fast. And so the only course that was available, or there was a course that was available in Raleigh the week before it was supposed to take it, they canceled it. And the only one that was available was in Richmond. I'd never been to Richmond. I've passed through it. Wasn't a huge fan of what I thought I saw. Had a 1-year-old daughter at the time, but I spent 8 weeks coming to Richmond on the weekends to study for the exam. Fell in love with it, met some people, and decided to come apply and got a job here.
Yeah, and that was with Tim's group, or that was
with Tim's group.
Gotcha.
Yep.
The funny part is when we first connected on LinkedIn, I guess a couple of years ago, whenever it was, you had a PE behind your name. I thought that meant PE teacher. I had no idea.
Do I look like a PE teacher? I mean, that's a compliment.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the athleticness and the athleticism is just like off the charts.
Let's keep talking about that.
Yeah. So, and then after a few years in Richmond, you started Hewitt in 2019.
So moved up here 2014, began working there. The primary motivation was my wife wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. We had one one daughter. We have four now. We had one at the time, and the opportunity up here presented a higher salary, and it was wild for us to even consider coming up here. It was really an act of faith and sort of some things falling into place that sort of said, you obviously need to move up there. Moved up here, worked in the commercial land development group for 4 years, then thought that I was going to be leaving because I was fed up with it, just the industry in general and a couple other things. There was a renewable energy group that was starting up at Timmons Group, and heard about it, decided to talk to the person who was sort of starting it up. Sounded pretty awesome. So I joined that group, and for the next 3+ years, I helped build that group up to doing a lot of utility scale solar projects across the Mid-Atlantic and stuff. And so that was 2019.
Okay.
At that point, summer 2019, and due to some personality, probably deficiencies and character deficiencies and that kind of stuff.
If that's a word, I have no idea.
Yeah, it probably is. We can make it up.
Yeah.
And decided that I was probably not, I needed to make some changes, and one of those was probably switching jobs, if not careers. So I had an opportunity to go work for a residential solar company to sort of just go hands off in the major engineering world. And so what's cool about that is, you have decisions like that you have to make on that sort of stuff. If you're relying on your own intellect or your own emotions, man, it's isolating, but two, you kind of know that you shouldn't make decisions by yourself. So right. Fortunately, I've got a good council of friends, was able to share with them some of my thoughts, and they said, yeah, you should really consider doing this. Then got an offer from that company. They said, hey, you should definitely do this. And so made that jump. Thought I was just going to hang out there for a little bit. And after 3 months of like helping them turn their system around and like fix some things that I was able to help them with, they got bought out by a company out of California.
Blessing in disguise.
Yep. So at that point I was like, man, what the heck? But because I worked with my friends and through prayer and some other things, I was confident that it wasn't a terrible thing. Yeah. So at that point it was, hey, I either go back or start something new, and Hewitt Solutions was born.
Yeah. Talk to me about that process though. Like when the company gets bought, there's a lot of uncertainty around that, right? Because you have a salary, company gets bought, and then you're like, what do I do? Do I get another job? Do I go back, or do I start my own? Now, obviously there's a riskier option here. And it's starting your own as far as just from like taking the actual leap. So what was like the mindset? I know you have some good counsel with your family and friends, but what was your mindset at the time when they got bought out and you were thinking, should I start this thing?
I'd like to say I was level-headed through it all, but there was a few sort of like linchpins, or you could say foundational aspects in my life that helped through that. I had friends who really know me. Not just the side of me that I want known, but also the side that I wish I could hide. That's what good friends are, a good community group and through my church and that kind of thing. So I had people that I was able to just sort of like voice concern and thoughts and process through things with. So I wasn't all in my head, which was good. But at that point, I had people confirm like what I was thinking, which is, hey, I've always been scrappy, like back to the pipeline days and the mowing grass and convincing the rich neighbor to pay me $7 an hour. Cause I forgot to mention, I think I was making $6.15.
That was above minimum wage at the time.
Yep. And so I got a raise, and I could wake up later, and I could essentially do what I wanted to do all day, cause he would go off work and I would just cut grass. So at that point, like I've always been scrappy in the sense that like, we'll figure it out. But I was able to also rely on some of the things that I was good at and some of the connections that I have. So a lot of pieces sort of made it obvious. Yeah.
So you obviously transitioned and you opened a company doing something similar to what you've been doing the last few years. What was the first 3 to 6 months like? Because obviously when anyone starts something, it's like a really exciting time. They're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I'm starting something. I'm doing this and doing that. And then slowly but surely, the excitement starts to wear off. So like what like when the excitement started to wear off, like how, I guess, quote unquote, like how'd you deal with it, or how'd it feel?
Yeah, it's a good question. And there's a couple pieces of that because prior to joining up with that residential company, I spent a lot of time at one single desk, a lot of hours, a lot of stress. Then I went for 3 months, and they were my job there. I was able to rely on experience and expertise to provide the value and not necessarily like grunt work.
Mhm.
So I spent a lot of time at the pool, a lot of time, answering emails at the pool briefly and then jumping back in. And so at that point, when that I had really not gotten spoiled, but like had seen the light in terms of like what possibilities were. And but then when that went away, I was like, man, I really don't want to go back to that. Um, and so that was October of 2019, and we were in decent enough financial situation where I could play around with this idea for a little bit, but not long, because
Right.
we had 3 daughters at that point, so we had mouths to feed and didn't have a huge savings. So,
was your wife working at the time?
no, since we moved to Richmond, the goal was for her to be able to.
So it's just you.
Homemade.
Yep. Yeah, gotcha.
But that was October 2019. We were in a position to where I could get scrappy. Went and talked to a previous client and said, "Hey, I'm thinking about doing this." They're like, "If you do it, we want to use you." So I look back at some of the contracts that we signed originally, and I'm like, man, these things were like
peanuts.
Yeah. Like I was hustling. And so that was October 2019, working from the house, working from Starbucks, that kind of thing. And then, but if you notice the date, October 19, was going through the winter. Things were getting a little bit tight. So I took a home equity line of credit to help us kind of carry through that first winter. I remember getting that thing up to $18,000 by like, February or March. And then COVID hits, changes the world, and didn't know how that would affect me. But there was some things that I was doing to get really scrappy. I got a really unique story about that. But
so your first few months, you already had, I guess, quote unquote, like a couple clients lined up.
Yeah.
So like your first few months, you're like, all right, I'm breaking off. I already got some quote unquote like sustainable revenue. And then COVID hit. So this was 6 months after you started the company, 8 months, COVID hit.
Yeah, October 2019. Yeah, 6 months.
So 6, 8 months. And so I imagine that was like your first like slap in the face when you had to take the home equity line of credit. And so how did you go from taking the slap in the face, home equity line of credit, to like continuing to grow and like not getting too negative or too down on yourself?
Yeah. I remember, so my wife and I have been together, we were high school sweethearts. And so our relationship was very, mature. Perfect, not at all, but very mature, where we had been through some storms. I mean, when we first got married, we had very little. And so that was a really good buoy to sort of carry us through as well. Just the fact that her and I this was not new to us. But so we had the HELOC, but I kept scratching, and I knew that we were about to, like, there was some opportunities there. I'd seen some real positives. And I think about, there was a couple clients that I knew that if I could just get them to answer the email, or just understand that I'm not the same as everybody else that's emailing them, that if I could just do that and show them what I'm doing for the people that I was already working with, because there were clients that relationally I knew in Richmond and Virginia area, that I was able to say, hey, you know me, I can do this for you. Let me do it. Let me show you. And so what I would do to win clients over, I'd say, here's a service that I offer. I'm going to do the first 2 for free, show you what I do. And if after that you like what we're doing, then let's keep it going.
I like that.
And so I would even send them a template of essentially, you're just going to essentially fill in your information. I'm going to knock this out. This is exactly what you need. Here's the first 2 for free. Let's rock and roll. So I was able to do that easily with people that I knew, but then it was a little bit harder because I'm trying to break into these larger companies that don't know me and sort of aren't really worried about switching over to the new guy. But I kept scratching, and here's a cool story. One time I kept working towards this one bigger company, and I knew, man, they're like national player. So I kept scratching, and then eventually I'm like, let me call this number. And I called this number, and person picks up. And typically when whoever picks up the phone is like, you're like 8 people away from who you want to talk to. So I'm like, this is exactly how it went.
Yeah.
Not verbatim, but close enough to how it went. I said, hey, sir, like, I know it sounds like a sales call, kind of is, mostly isn't. I said, you all are paying for a service that I offer already. And a lot of people that I've like provided this service to have really liked making the switch. And so this is something that the person that's responsible for this decision would want to talk to me about. If you could just pass me on to them, like, I won't bother them too long. And he said, well, that's unique because I am that person. I just happen to be walking past this person's desk that normally answers the phone. I'm the director of engineering, what you got? And so I was able to like,
wow.
Yeah, I'm shocked. I'm like, I had to meet, said, I apologize, sir. Like typically I'm like a couple degrees away from being able to talk to you. He goes, no, I totally understand. We chatted for a little bit. He said, send me your information. Then he ghosted me for a couple months, but I stayed on it, reminded him of what he said, reminded him of some of the things that he saw that we talked about. And then after a few months, they sent me the first request for services. And at this point, it's say June 2020. I'm working in our little master bedroom of our little house at the time, right beside the very cold vent. There was one vent that just would pour out the AC, and I'm sitting there like freezing cold all day.
That's the worst too. That's the worst part of everything.
So the first request comes in, I'm sitting there like, awesome. And the second, third, fourth, and like by the 10th that day, I'm like yelling to my wife down the hall, like, I got another one. She's coming in and we're like hugging and stuff, and it's a big deal. And so for there on out, like that was a big revenue generator, really provided the opportunity to go and put some money in the bank. And I remember when I was like scrappy for like a $500 check. I was like, man, checking the mailbox every day. And that's generally the size of the paychecks that I was getting every couple weeks and then I got one that was $9,000, and immediately I felt like, man, I don't deserve this. This is too much money. I called a friend and said, hey man, I got this. It's awesome. I'm like, here's what I'm thinking about doing with it, which was giving a lot of it away like an idiot. And you can
go bankrupt, baby.
Yeah, you can be an idiot. You can do very noble things thinking you're going to like give stuff away and it not be a good idea. And he goes, no, you're not. You're going to put that in the bank and you're going to keep working and you can give it away one day.
Yeah. Would you call that your first quote unquote win in business when you got that $9,000 check?
Yeah, that was huge. That was huge. Yeah, that ended up allowing us to go from $500 here and there to, having $20,000 months.
More stability.
Yeah.
A lot more stability. And that was 8 months from the conception, from the start?
Yeah, so I provided essentially two different lines of service. And in that line of service, that was the one that allowed me to sort of fund the operation to where I could go after this other line of service that was more robust and had a longer term play. That's the line of service that I'm in today.
Gotcha. Was there any time during the like initial phases where you go, hey, screw this, I want to get a job? Like the first 6 to 8 months when you're making those $500 checks, where you
$18,000 on a home equity line of credit that continues to go up with not a whole lot of hope in sight. That about that time.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, I remember my wife saying, "Hey, have you thought about like
getting a job?"
Yeah, like what's Plan D at this point?
Right.
And I wanted to love her well and care for her well and give her the security that she needed, which included me saying, "Hey, I'm still sane here." And you're right. Like that is a real possibility at this point. I honestly trying to remember back. I kind of forget. This is the importance of journaling, which I don't do, but I would say that, I probably was not nearly convinced enough that should have been an option I should consider. I was still very much an optimist, but she asked me, we weren't long. We were probably a month away from needing to happen and some pivotal things.
Yeah. So my next question was like, how close, even like mindset's one thing, but like financials a whole nother when you have mouths to feed, and financially you're about a month away.
Yeah. I would say we were 30 days away at that point from like throwing in the towel. And by throwing in the towel, that's hadn't thought about it till you brought it up this way. That was a really pivotal moment because once you try something and you go back, I'm not sure how many people try again.
Right. Yeah, especially if you're like, hey, I did it, I tried it. First of all, most people don't take the leap in the first place.
Right.
Start their own thing. Most people don't. And then if it doesn't work out, like not most of them don't, then probably not going to try.
Yeah, I remember
again.
people would be like, "Yo, I can't believe you got the guts to go out on your own." I'm like, "Hey,
yeah,
I kind of didn't. It was kind of forced on me."
Yeah.
Yeah. It kind of happened. So like, don't give me too much credit here.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you still made that choice, and kind of in the position that I'm in, it's like the excitement is worn off, and so now it's just in the quote unquote like battle phase. Where it's like, yeah, the first few months, it's like, oh my, like we're doing this, you get a few clients under your belt, like, it starts to feel good. And then you hit that point where it's like, there's no, like the excitement kind of like, don't get me wrong, it's still great. It's still fun.
Right.
But the golden or the excitement, quote unquote, wears off. And you're like, hey, now I got to make some legit money somehow.
So how do you go about like,
I haven't figured it out. It's a great question.
What's the are there metrics for understanding like, hey, if this happens, then I need to pivot. If this happens, I need to pivot.
100%. Yeah. I've mapped out every single financial situation. I've also mapped out every single way that this can possibly go, negative or positive.
Yeah.
Right. Like, so if it goes one of these typically 4 ways, it's got to go one of these 3 or 4 ways. And we just got to prepare because I'm not married yet, right? Serious girlfriend, but not married yet. So I got to do everything I possibly can to not lose enough money to where I have to call it quits.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's essentially where we are. And like trying to find a way. And then the most frustrating part about where I am right now is like when you're doing the work and you're doing better work and you're doing what you think you should be doing and then not getting rewarded for it. Especially in me, like, right? 'Cause I mean, very much of our culture is instant gratification. And you're like, I really hope this pays off in 12 months. Right? Which is a tough mindset to kind of have.
It's a long-term view in my world, but you're right. Like that's how you should play it.
Yeah. Yeah. And the only way I stay sane, literally the only way, I mean, obviously my faith plays a big part, but like to realize like what is worst case scenario.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's really not, I mean, essentially, you were very instrumental in the reason I jumped out. And when you were like, you would get a personal MBA, even if this doesn't work.
Yeah.
Right? And I kind of reframed my perspective. You did. And I thank you for that. But even if everything, like nothing works and everything fails, I still think it's a win.
It's a net win for sure.
Yeah. So that's the way, that's kind of how I at least stay sane most days.
Dude, I was on a call right before coming over here to hang out, and the call was talking about a $5 million cyber security insurance policy that I'm having to figure out, and a data security plan, which, in this new world of cyber attacks for the type of work that I do, like that's a real thing to have to consider. And so I'm talking to these IT and insurance and cyber and security professionals. We're talking a lot, decent amount of money. $5 million insurance policy is not easy to get,
right,
and not easy to afford. And so I'm literally sitting on that call being like, I'm glad they didn't tell me about this, when I was taking that home equity line of credit out, because I could not be in position. Yeah. It's very parallel to a buddy of mine when I had a daughter. She was like sick. The first one was 6 months. He goes, man, I could not imagine having a 6-month-old right now. He's a single dude.
Yeah.
I said, well, first imagine finding out that test is positive, because that's a huge thing to like get your mind wrapped around. And then after that, maybe think about what like a newborn looks like, and then whatever.
Yeah.
Kind of like I couldn't imagine being
one step at a time.
Couldn't imagine being 80 years old right now.
Right. Yeah.
Like I can imagine being 40. Imagine being 50.
Yeah. But I would say if hindsight was 2020, what would you tell Ricky the day you stepped out? Would he tell him anything? Like Ricky today, would he tell Ricky in 2019 anything?
Yeah, I would. I would say like the values that are there, and if you sit down and write them out, you can take the time to write them out and know what it is that is like critically a non-negotiable in terms of values, And then from that, like you can create like a really awesome lens to see life and then to make decisions. Sometimes like in entrepreneurial space, it's like when everything's an option, it's almost like nothing is.
Right.
So I have no options to move forward if everything is possible. Mm-hmm. And so how do I like evaluate opportunities? And, you know, I've had to pay consultants to help me think about like what those values are and to help me to set up practices and procedures for remembering those and applying those. But I would tell Ricky of 2019, understand what it is that you're like very convinced of, establish that, and then rely on those to make decisions moving forward. I think a lot of times I spent just in angst or going the wrong direction because what I thought was right, like a client, for instance, that didn't really align with the values. All I could see was the fact that they could help pay the bills. I'm not necessarily against that, but I would say I've spent a lot of times chasing sort of shadows as opposed to like what you're doing. What I can see that you're doing, you've got a very clear vision of what you want, and anything that sort of derails you from that or is not in line with that, you've identified it and you've been able to make decisions much more clear.
Yeah. But yeah,
you're significantly younger than me, so you're thinking a little clearer. But I'm thankful. Yeah, I would say do what Christians do. Do what Christian does. Like I would say that.
Yeah, that's good, man. That's good. How's your mindset changed since you started it? Like right now, what's your mindset today? 4 years in.
So I should mention that I went into business ownership in this space a little bit kicking and screaming, like back to the personality test at NC State. I'm not a natural fit as somebody who's decent at math, but not necessarily an engineer's engineer. And so the idea of owning a business and being self-employed in that space where you take on all the risk and have to do that type of work was always a little something I wasn't interested in. And I remember my dad, back at the point where I told you earlier, I had to accept that low-paying position because I felt like God was like trying to help impress on my heart, like, hey, you manage this well, like there might be more for you, but if you can't manage this, then you'll mess up a bigger offer later.
Right.
But I remember that about that time, so I took the position, got working, and within a few months, it was just like overwhelming how difficult and technical the work was. And I'm like, Dad, this is like too much. He's like, well, calm down. Thanks, Dad. He said, like in 5 or 8 years, like the things that you think are problems today are not, you're going to look at those like, oh, like I was worried about that. He goes, you keep doing that, you'll own your own business doing this one day. And I thought, like, I'm like, that is absolutely never going to happen.
So you never thought growing up, you're like, I'm going to own my own business?
Not in this space. Yeah. To answer the question, the mindset would be when I was getting into it, it was like, why would I want to do that? That's not for me. And through just seeing like society and things that are changing in society, the mindset now for trying to maintain this business and being willing to go after clients that require these big cyber policies and data security plans, it's not just for me anymore. And it's not even just for my immediate family. Like the ability to provide opportunities for people. Everybody talks culture, blah, blah, blah. But I think that's just because people say it and don't necessarily live up to it doesn't mean that it's like garbage. So the opportunity that I have to establish a business that has good culture and provides opportunities, almost like a raft for somebody and their friends in the industry that are like, man, I can keep sticking it out here doing what I'm doing because I know that should I ever want to like jump ship or be forced to jump ship or get cut, like I can come join you. Yeah. So like understanding that it's outside of me more these days allows me to
more of an outward mindset.
Yeah, it really is. And that's way more motivating, and that's not because I'm not inward focused. I'm inward focused all the time, but that runs its course and it leaves you wanting more.
Yeah. So I know you mentioned, obviously not knowing if you're going to make it in the first year, taking out a home equity line of credit, but were there any other struggles, whether it was on the marketing side, sales side, operation side, that you really went through in the first 12 months?
Yeah. So as somebody who never dealt with anxiety or anything like that, I remember having my first panic attack. I've had two. One was there, and I had this. It was in the middle of the night. Woke up for some reason and thought about just this specific project, and just remember like thinking about all these ways in which it could go wrong, and that I was like did all that sort of math and approach and science stuff on my own, and had a panic attack and kind of freaked out a little bit in the middle of the night. And what I realized though is that being a solopreneur, which I was at the time, was really isolating and alone, especially when like in the consulting design world where you're helping people make really big decisions on, project. As an engineer, we seal things. We're very ethically minded. So like you can convince yourself that maybe you made a wrong decision. So like that really helped me see that I should not be alone in this.
Yeah. That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
As someone who also struggles with anxiety since I was pretty much younger, it's like people don't talk about that side enough, where it's like, whether it's entrepreneurship or even people that are athletes, but like, everyone's just trying to make it work. Everyone's struggling to a certain degree, whether it's mental health, whether it's anxiety or depression, but just like you said, just surround yourself with a good group of people and just like not isolating yourself, at least for me, has been very beneficial.
Yeah. Yeah. You need people to speak truth.
Yeah.
To you.
It's very anxiety inducing.
Yeah, you can lie to yourself and be very convinced of what you're hearing.
Yeah. That's why I just tell myself that I'm in fantasy land over here. So it works out pretty well. But last question I would ask you. This one's actually presented by Lighthouse Labs.
Okay.
You ready for a question here?
Let's hear it, Lighthouse.
So what are 3 tips that you would give people who are aspiring entrepreneurs? So someone who maybe is at Capital One or at CarMax, or I don't know, it doesn't matter, at a company, and they're thinking about taking the leap. What are 3 tips you would give that individual?
Yeah, so it'd probably be the same 3 tips I would give anybody in life. And that is to realize that there is more to life than what we sort of see right in front of us. There's a real objective truth to life. There is, if we say that we should be moral, we have to ask the question, why? If we say we should be good to our neighbor, we should ask why. Like, why is that true? Well, because like most people say, because we all agree. I said, well, who's we? And what if we all don't agree? Like, is that, no, we would say it's objectively true that we should be moral and good to our neighbor. And I'd say, like, dig into that and understand why. So have a real foundation to your worldview. Also, I think I mentioned it earlier, like, understand your values and like what it is important. Like, try to plant some flags. If everything's an option, nothing is. And if everything's an option, the reason I say nothing is because you will chase everything. If you go duck hunting and you try to shoot all 5 ducks with one shot, you'll shoot none. So the values really help make sure that you understand how to put your bead on that one duck and make decisions effectively. And then find people that also have similar values and like surround yourself with them. Give them sort of the keys to ask you questions and tell you stuff you might not want to hear. And it's like we're such a society where we're so independent, and we're becoming more independent minded. And we were never created, based off my worldview, we were never created to be as independent as we are.
Right.
And so like we need to say, well, that's a little uncomfortable for that person to be like partnering with me and managing my budget at home, or to help me say like, hey, you're working a lot, Ricky. Like, how's that affecting, folks at home? Have you thought about the impact that you're working so much? So yeah, so like have something solid. How do you know you're moving, Christian? If you're stopped at a stoplight and you're in a car and you get your foot on the brake and you feel like you're moving, how do you know?
I guess I just look around. Yeah.
Well, you would see that your position relative to the building beside you is different. So it's shifting. And you immediately go to like, my car's moving. How do you know? Because you know that building's not moving. That building's a fixed object. And like get really get an understanding of what are some fixed objects, fixed truths that are true whether we like them or not, true whether or not, like no matter where we're at in the scale of time. that really helps anchor things, but also tease out your values, understand what those are, and then put people around you that can help make sure that you're living in light of those, or remind you, hey, you said that like stewardship was like a big thing, or discipline was a big thing, or that serving others, or that, you know, whatever, being a nice guy. You're not a nice guy right now. So all those, I would say, those apply directly to entrepreneurship, because one, we should always be founding, you know, the way we see the world based off truth. We should understand the values in which we want to make decisions, like accepting that client. If you say we're going to do, you know, we're going to be honest and loyal. Well, if the client's not honest and loyal, then should you really be working with them? And then also like have friends and people in your corner that can help tell you, like when you might say, well, like, is that selfish of me to do? They're like, no, it's not selfish. Go do it.
Right.
That's nice to have.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, what a mic drop. What a good 3 tips, man.
It's the whiskey.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Ricky, cannot thank you enough. 1, for being a friend, but 2, for being on the podcast. Really enjoyed the conversation, and I know everyone else will as well. Yeah, man, I've been invited on 4. This is the first one, and it's because of you, sir, and my desire to see you succeed. Yeah. Thanks, brother. Yep. Appreciate it. Thank you for listening to this episode of Richmond Entrepreneur. As always, if you have a friend who's an entrepreneur, founder, CEO, aspiring entrepreneur, maybe wants to open up a cleaning company on the side, please feel free to refer, shout us out on social media as we expand into the Richmond market. As always, this podcast is brought to you by Lighthouse Labs. Lighthouse Labs is the premier nationally recognized startup accelerator here in Virginia. Lighthouse Labs has accelerated more than 95 companies, investing over $2 million to date of equity-free money. Their 11-week program for high-growth startups helps founders move fast, expand their market, and test their business with the support of mentors, industry experts, investors, support services, office space, and $20,000 of that seed funding at 0% equity. I've met some of their mentors, and let me tell you, some good people over there. For more information or to make a donation investing in the lives of founders, visit lighthouselabsrva.com.